Hello everyone, Mr. Ong here. In this video, I'll be going through your Term 2 holiday homework. If you recall, your Term 2 holiday homework was G9. It was a comparison practice based on whether the communists were causing trouble in Singapore. Okay, I've gone through this at the end of Term 2. This was supposed to be your holiday homework. If you haven't already done this homework, can you please pause this video, complete the homework, and then come back to this video. The reason why is because in this video, I'll be going through the answers and I'll be getting you guys to mark the answers. Okay? And if you haven't already done the video, then you haven't done the practice, then this whole video won't make any sense. Okay, so this video is going to be split into several parts. What I'm going to do is I'm going to show you guys how to analyze the questions. I'm going to mark some examples of work with you. I'm going to show you how I mark it using these components of comparison. Basically, we'll look through the answer. If it has a certain element which is a good element, which is a good part of the answer, we'll take it correct, and then I'll show you exactly how I mark your work. Okay, so once again, if you haven't already done this practice, the G9 practice found on Google Classroom, please pause the video, go and do the practice first, and then come back to this video. Now, in this practice was focused almost entirely on the comparison skill, which is a source-based skill we learned in Sec 1, and we had a little bit of a refresher at the end of Term 2. If you remember, a comparison skill requires you to look at two historical sources and try to figure out in what ways are they similar or in what ways are they different. Remember that for every single comparison paragraph, we always want to start with a common criteria. Last year, we used the examples of bubble tea, okay, and we compared things like IT and LiHo, okay. So if you look at these two drinks, similarity-wise, they are both beverages, okay. In terms of differences, you might say that they have a difference in cost, they have a difference in taste, so on and so forth. These are your common criteria. What's special about history is that in addition to just identifying what is the topic or the common criteria you're comparing two sources with, you need to provide evidence and explanations. Okay. Note that there's a slightly different format required of similarity answers. In this case, you see that all you need to provide is the common criteria, the evidence for the first source and explanation for the first source, and then evidence and explanation for the second source. For a paragraph that shows the difference between two sources, you realize there's this additional requirement of including the inference from the first and second source. Okay, because obviously if you tell me that, for example, bubble tea and LiHo and IT are different in terms of cost, you need to tell me I can infer or I know that IT is cheaper than LiHo. LiHo, I can know it's more expensive. You gotta tell me the additional inference. But it's not needed under similarities because, I mean, if both of them are beverages, you don't need to tell me that I can learn that LiHo is a beverage, I can learn that IT is a beverage. I already kind of know that. Okay, so that's just a brief reminder or refresher on the components or the different things that need to be inside your comparison answer. Okay, next, we remember that when we look at these questions, they will give you a hint, or you are supposed to be able to identify how many types of similarity or difference paragraphs you're supposed to provide. For example, a question like how different are sources A and B? They can be very different, they can be somewhat different, they can be not different. That means they are completely similar. In this case, it's a rough hint that you're supposed to provide at least one similarity and at least one difference paragraph. Okay, how different are sources A and B? Okay, one similarity, one difference. Now, what about a question like 1B? How are sources C and D different? Okay, here I'm already telling you, I'm already giving the hint. I want you just to focus on their difference. It would be good to provide at least one difference paragraph. If you can find two differences between the sources, that'll be great. I won't be going through the sources because I already more or less went through them in Term 2. Plus, you will see from the answers that I'll be going through some of the answers anyway. Okay, so now let's turn to look at this first example on page 2. Okay, so we're looking at question 1A, how different are sources A and B? Just a quick refresher. This is source A, this is source B. Okay, they are both about how the Chinese students or people in Singapore reacted when the British introduced the National Service Ordinance, the law that required people to serve national service. We remember from the lessons that the locals took this very badly because they hated the British and they thought that the British were going to send them to die, and therefore they rioted. Now, so these first two sources are looking at this National Service Ordinance. Okay, so let's mark this together with me. So whatever I mark on this script, I would like you to do the same. Okay, so as I'm looking through the answer, I'm seeing how different are sources A and B. So I remember, okay, I got to look for one similarity. Oops. And one difference. Okay, so let's look at this first sentence. Sources A and B are similar in showing student discontent toward the British. Okay, I like this. Student discontent towards the British, and they're telling me is similar. What I'm seeing from here is I'm seeing your comparison word. That means you're telling me whether it's similar or different, and I'm seeing your common criteria. Okay, so very good. I'm going to take common criteria. Then I'm going to see source A states that the Chinese students were strongly against it as they felt that they had to serve the British when the British did not care for them. Okay, good. This is a good piece of evidence because I can see from this source that they were discontent. Okay, strongly against it. Okay, so I'm going to take this. This means that the Chinese were not supportive of the British introduction of national service because they considered the British poor leaders. Okay, this is a very good explanation. Okay, so I'm going to move on to look at what they say about source B, and I want to see whether they can similarly tell me, are they discontent. So for source B states that when the students grew too violent, the police were ordered in to control the situation. Okay, so I get the sense that the students were doing things which were violent. That means they're using force. They were starting to harm people. This means that the Chinese students resorted to protests to show their anger towards the British introduction of national service. Okay, very good. So evidence and explanation. This first paragraph is what we would consider a positive example of a similarity paragraph. Okay. Now that I've shown you how to mark one example, this paragraph, what I would like to do is to look at this second paragraph. Okay. There are some differences between the first and second example. I'm going to get you guys to pause this video and to mark this answer in the same way that I marked this first example. Okay, after you have finished marking this example, I will come back and I will show you how I would mark it. Now, the point of this is that I want to show you, or I want you guys to get to think from the perspective of the teacher. If you can think, if I'm the teacher, what am I looking out for? That shows that you really understand the skill. Okay, so please don't wait for the video to just pass the time. Just pause the video now and complete the marking. Okay, at this point, I hope that you have already finished marking for this. So what I would like you to do is to compare my marking with your marking. So ideally, we have done this in different colors. Okay, so let's read the first sentence together. Remember, the question is how different are sources A and B? Both sources are similar. Okay, so I'm going to underline this. I see a comparison word. In describing the anger from that the Singapore locals had against the British. Okay, so I'm going to take this. This is your common criteria. Okay, so good. I can infer from source A that the locals were not satisfied with the British leadership. Okay, that sounds like it's going to be similar to the first example. So I'm going to take this. Okay, so just because I didn't require you to have an inference for the first source doesn't mean you can't provide it. In fact, actually when you do, it makes it even clearer. Okay, let's continue reading. Source A. Source A says that the Chinese students were strongly against it as they felt that they served the British and the British did not care for them. Okay, we saw this just now. Okay, so this is a good piece of evidence. This means that the Chinese opposed national service. They rejected it as they felt that the British were uncaring. Okay, they opposed, uncaring, and therefore did not deserve their support. Okay, very good. Okay, so this is a very good evidence explanation. I can see very clearly here that source A shows me that the locals were angry against the British. Similarly, I can infer from source B that the British used just enough force to stop the riots. Hey, wait a second. This is a bit strange, right? Because here, the common criteria, or the thing that I'm trying to compare both sources with, is about the anger Singapore locals had. And then over here, the inference about source B is about how the British used just enough force. Okay, so here, this is wrong. Mistaken. Why? It says a mismatch. Common criteria does not match the riots. It is like if you were comparing Li Ho and coy about the item of price. You'll say that LiHo is more expensive, but koi is very tasty, right? There's a mismatch between the common criteria and the inference, so this is wrong. And accordingly, let me see what evidence this student uses. Source B says that when the students grew too violent, police were ordered in to control, blah blah. It was the actions of the rioters that required the British to increase their force. Okay, so this is irrelevant. The moment there's a mismatch between the common criteria or CC and the inference, it's going to be wrong because it's not answering the question and ADQ. Okay, so this is a bad example. I'll put a cross here, I'll put a cross here. Okay, hopefully this makes it clearer. Now, let's move on to the difference paragraph, because remember when we study sources A and B, there could be similarities and there could be differences. So now I'm going to show you how I mark this example, and then after which you guys are going to practice marking using this example. Okay, so let's look at this first example. Okay, so sources A and B are different in showing the cause of the riots, cause for the riots. Okay, good. So I'm seeing several things here. I'm seeing the comparison word. I am seeing your common criteria. Okay, good job. I can infer from source A that the British poor government was the cause of the riots. Okay, so whoops. The British poor government was the cause of the riots. Okay, so this is your inference from the first source. Source A says that the British colonial government did not provide funding for the Chinese schools, and the colonial government favoured the English educated rather than the Chinese educated. Okay, so these were examples of how the British did not care. British did not care for the Chinese. Okay, this is a good piece of evidence that you're selecting. This means that the British had treated the Chinese poorly, and this led to the Chinese protesting against the British. Okay, good. So this is a good explanation. Why is it a good explanation? Because you picked evidence that shows me British poor government, and you show me how it's linked to the cause of the riots. Okay, so good. However, okay, I like this connecting word. However, I can infer from source B that the communists were the cause for the riots. Okay, so this is your inference. Remember, if you read back the background information and you recall what you studied in the content, the communists were considered by the British to be people who wanted to just overthrow them, or using violence for no good reason. Okay. So source B says that the communists use this as an opportunity to spread communist ideas during this time. Okay, this is a good evidence. It tells me some role that the communists played in the riots. This means that the communists started the riots as a way to increase their popularity among the locals. Okay, that's a good explanation. So this is a positive example of a difference paragraph. It has a good common criteria, the big overarching topic between source A and B. It's got your IEE from your first source. Remember, this is your IEE. And this is your IEE from the second source. And it's well explained. Okay, so this is a good example. Now, similarly, pause this video, complete marking this exemplar or this example, and then come back to the video once you're done to compare your marking with Mr. Ong's marking. Okay, at this point, I assume that you are done with your marking for this example. Let me go through it. So when I read this, let's see, both sources differ about whether the locals use violence against the British. Okay, so this is your common criteria, your CC, and this is your comparison word, comparison. But is it similar or is it different? You're answering the question. Okay. Source A states that the Chinese students wait. See, so here, this student is already giving the evidence, but there's something missing, right? This inference is missing. So this is not good. What I would do as the marker is I'll continue reading on in the paragraph to see whether there's any part of this answer that I can use as his inference. Okay. Source A says that the Chinese students were strongly against it, the National Service Ordinance, as they felt that they served the British when the British did not care for them. This means that the locals only had negative feelings but did not take action against the British. Okay, so here I do see that there's a link between the actions by locals and the common criteria. So I'm going to mark this as I accept this as your inference, and this is going to be your evidence. However, because this is considered to be your inference, I would say your explanation is lacking. Okay, you could have afforded to go deeper or explain more clearly about this piece of evidence. So here, I'll give you marks for inference and evidence, but no explanation. Okay. However, I can infer from source B that the locals use violence. Okay, see here, this student gives the inference for the second source. So in this case, it's a bit strange that the student forgot to give the inference in the first source, then remembers it in the second source. Source B says that when the students grew too violent, the police were ordered in to control the situation. This means that the students went beyond just having negative feelings, but actually fought against the British. So I'll take this was evidence and explanation. Okay, so for this example, just remember, this is a very common mistake. Oftentimes, students forgot about including inference. This is more forgivable for the similarity paragraph over here, right? No inference needed here because the common criteria is the same inference for both sources. That's why they are similar. But because this is a difference paragraph, you need to give both the common criteria, the big topic, and also identify specifically how are they different. Hence, the need for the inferences. Okay, so now let's move on to the next question, 1b, which is on how are sources C and D different. Okay, here, similarly, I would like you guys to pause the video and then, please pause this video, go and mark these two examples. Okay, mark these two examples and then come back to the video once we're done. Just to remind you guys, okay, so now that you're back, just remind you guys what is source C and D about. Where source A and B were talking about National Service Ordinance, sources C and D are looking more specifically at the Hock Lee bus riots. Okay, Hock Lee bus riots. Okay, so let's look at this question. How are sources C and D different? Remember, they can be very different. That means two differences. They can be somewhat different, one similarity, one difference. Or they can be not different at all, they're completely the same. So two similarities. In this case, I'm telling you how they're different. Focus only on differences. Okay, focus only on differences. So let's read this first paragraph. I'm looking for a difference paragraph. I can infer from source C that the communists were not responsible. Okay, I'm gonna see that here they're missing things, right? I'm missing my entire answer the question. They don't answer at all. How are they different? Okay, so there's no common criteria here. In fact, this student just jumps straight into an inference. He says, I can infer from source C that the communists were not responsible. Okay, I'm just going to continue marking this as if the student gives a normal inference first, and we'll see as it goes. Okay, so an inference, source C states that Fong Swee Suan was identified as a chief instigator. Chief instigator is the person who starts the riot. However, he claimed that the riot was not initiated by the Malayan Communist Party. Hey, this means that while the communists have participated in the riot, they were not the ones who planned and started it. Okay, so this is what Fong Swee Suan claims. Okay, and I see that evidence and explanation are both there, just that there's no common criteria. Okay, I'm going to read on. However, I like this connecting word. I can infer from source D that the communists were responsible. Okay, communists were responsible. So this is your inference for source D. Source D says that the communist elements in the PAP were the drivers behind the violence and bloodshed. It was clear by this time that very large numbers of workers and Chinese were being gathered along Alexandra Road by bus and lorry. This means that the communists were the ones who had planned the riots and were organizing protesters to stir up trouble. So if I were to just read this and I'm figuring out, actually maybe the riots started somewhere at the Hock Lee Bus Company, but these communists, they were starting to round up other protesters from around Singapore, gathering them and then transporting them over to fight against the British. So this very clearly shows me that the communists were responsible for the riots. Okay, so evidence and explanation all there for the second source. The critical or the very, very major error here in this answer is that there's no common criteria. In fact, what this student has done is basically given me two sets of IEEs. Such an answer will not pass, meaning you won't even pass this question even if both sets of IEEs are correct. The reason why it wouldn't pass is for the simple reason you didn't answer the question. Okay, so this is a critical error. Okay, I hope that you have also paused the video to mark this. If you haven't paused to try out marking, please do so. Okay, so let's go through this together. The sources also differ in showing how violent the protesters were against the police. Okay, good. So unlike the previous example, this student actually gives a common criteria. I can infer from source C that the protesters were generally peaceful. So Source C states that the workers from the bus company continue to block the gate despite repeated warnings from the police. Okay, so inference and evidence, I do see if I'm just standing, I'm just blocking the gate, well, that's not me fighting against the police, right? However, I can infer, so there is a missing explanation here. Okay, so no explanation. However, I can infer from source D that the protesters were violent. Source D states, throughout the night, repeated hit and run attacks were made on the police. Okay, so here, interestingly, the student gives very solid inferences and evidences, but no explanations given. Okay, so in this case, there is another mistake. Okay, now let's sum up what we have just done in this video. In this video, what we have done is to go through or to refresh ourselves on the components or the different parts that make up a comparison answer. We notice that whether or not this is a similarity paragraph or difference paragraph between the sources, you must always start with the common criteria. This is the most important thing. And the other similarity, which across both paragraphs, is both paragraphs definitely need your evidence and explanations. Just that, for the similarity paragraph, because the common criteria is the same as the inference, then you don't need to put it again, otherwise you're just repeating the same thing 3 times. But for the difference paragraph, you must clearly show me your inferences. Okay, next, we went through several examples of students' work. You have followed my marking for the first few examples, and then you have practice marking yourself. I hope you guys are able to see and identify what the teachers are looking out for. Okay, now that we have completed marking these few examples of students' work, what I would like you to do is to mark your own holiday homework. Okay, mark it in a different color. If like say you were writing it or annotating it on PDF, if you had typed it out, what I would like you to do is to highlight your own typed out text and then add comments along the side, or you can just tick along the right column to show me, in your mind, did you have the different comparison components. I say again, go back to, so now, once you're done marking G10, I want you to go back to your holiday homework G9. You should have done your own answers over here. You mark your answers accordingly and identify whether it has the different components, and then do your corrections accordingly. When I come back to school, what I would like to do is to look through your marked examples. So I don't just want to see that you've completed your comparison answers. I also want to see that you have marked the examples, because I want to teach you about how to do the comparison skill from the point of view of the teacher. Okay? Yeah. Looking forward to seeing you guys. Thank you.